If anyone knew exhaustion, it was T'Challa. Because being the person everyone expects to have it all together is exhausting. Being the dependable one, the mature one, the one who makes the right choice, the one who doesn't screw up because apparently you've been elected the spokesperson of competence. No pressure. And the funny thing is, most of us don't remember applying for this job. Maybe you were just the oldest sibling. That's me. Maybe you were the gifted kid. Maybe your family had a plan for your future before you even had a personality. Maybe you became the peacemaker, like me, because everyone else in the house treated conflict like it was an Olympic sport. I know if there was a prize for most fights in 1 week, my family would win first place. Somewhere along the way, people started handing you expectations. And expectations are sneaky. At first, they feel like compliments. You're so responsible. You're a natural leader. We know you'll do the right thing. Until one day you wake up and realize you have absolutely no idea whether the life you're living is the one you chose or the one you inherited. Which brings us to today's episode. Because if anyone understands what it means to carry a crown that feels heavier than vibranium, it's T'Challa, King of Wakanda, Black Panther, son, protector, leader, and underneath all of that, a man trying to answer one terrifying question: who am I when everyone already thinks they know who I should be? So, settle in, fellow mages, because today we talk about leadership, legacy, responsibility, and what happens when the expectations of others collide with the person you're trying to become. Let's get into it. Welcome back, fellow mages, to the Grounded Mage, where we explore how myth and magic exist in everyday life. When we first meet T'Challa in the Black Panther, he's grieving. His father has just passed away. And before he even has time to process that loss, Wakanda turns to him and says, "Terribly sorry about your dad. Anyway, here's the monarchy." No pressure. There's actually a beautiful scene during the ancestral ritual where T'Challa meets his father. He kneels before him and he says, "I'm not ready to be without you." And honestly, how many of us have had our own version of that moment? It doesn't necessarily have to be losing a parent. It could be losing certainty, graduating, starting a career, becoming a parent, taking over a family business, being promoted, getting married, becoming this person who everyone now expects to actually know what they're doing. Meanwhile, internally, you are screaming, "I was under the impression there would be training." Research by Herminia Ibarra suggests that major identity shifts often happen before we feel prepared for them. Psychologists call this role transition. We don't become confident and then take on the role. More often, we take on the role and then slowly grow into someone capable of carrying it. That's deeply uncomfortable because we'd all prefer the Disney montage version. 3 songs later, confidence, wisdom, perfect skin, flawless leadership. Instead, most growth looks like T'Challa: trying, questioning, listening, failing, adjusting, trying again. Have you been wanting to feel ready before stepping into a role you've already been called toward? What if readiness isn't the prerequisite, but the result? Hollywood loves the natural leader, the charismatic genius who walks into a room and everyone immediately follows. T'Challa completely ruins that fantasy because his greatest strength isn't certainty, it's humility. He asks questions, he seeks counsel, he listens to Nakia, Okoye, Shuri, Ramonda, M'Baku. Honestly, Wakanda's group chats must have been exhausting. But this lines up beautifully with modern leadership research. Psychologist Jim Collins, in his work on what he called level 5 leadership, found the most effective leaders combined two seemingly contradictory traits: professional will and personal humility. They weren't driven by ego, they weren't obsessed with proving themselves, they were committed to serving something larger than themselves. Sound familiar? T'Challa doesn't walk around announcing how amazing he is. He doesn't confuse authority with wisdom. He recognizes that leadership isn't having all of the answers. Leadership is creating conditions where the truth can emerge. And that's very different because some of us secretly think leadership means never doubting ourselves. But certainty and competence are not the same thing. Sometimes the strongest leaders are the ones who are secure enough to say, I don't know, tell me what I'm missing. When was the last time you asked for input instead of trying to prove yourself? Do you see asking for help as a weakness or wisdom? Something I find interesting about Black Panther is throughout most of the movie, T'Challa is trying to honor his father's legacy. He admires T'Chaka, he respects him, he wants to continue what came before. But then he finds out the truth. His father abandoned his nephew, he unalived his own brother, and then left Eric behind. Suddenly, the man T'Challa idolized becomes complicated, and that's devastating. Psychologists call this differentiation. Family systems theorist Murray Bowen argued that maturity involves developing a solid sense of self while remaining emotionally connected to our families. In simpler terms, growing up means realizing that the people who shaped you were neither heroes nor villains. They were just humans, which is uncomfortable because certainty is easier. Parents are good, parents are bad, traditions are right, traditions are wrong. But adulthood asks more of us. It asks, can you honor what was valuable without repeating what was harmful? And for T'Challa, the answer eventually becomes yes. He doesn't reject Wakanda, he transforms it. He doesn't erase his father's memory, he learns from his father's mistakes. And maybe that's what healthy legacy actually is, not preservation, but evolution. What beliefs, traditions, or expectations have you inherited? Which ones deserve to be carried forward, and which ones should just end with you? Of course, after that, now we have to talk about Killmonger. Because Black Panther becomes extraordinary the moment it stops being a story about good versus evil and becomes a story about two wounded visions of justice. Eric grew up abandoned, isolated, angry. He experienced injustice firsthand while Wakanda stayed hidden. His pain became his purpose, his grief became his identity, and eventually, his identity became vengeance. Psychologist Carl Jung described the concept of the shadow, which, yes, we talk about a lot on this channel. That is the parts of ourselves that we reject, deny, or just refuse to acknowledge. But shadows don't disappear simply because we ignore them. They actually grow stronger when we do that. Killmonger becomes Wakanda's shadow. Everything the nation refused to confront, the cost of isolation, the people left behind, the suffering outside its borders, the unintended consequences of protecting itself. That's what makes T'Challa's growth so powerful. He doesn't simply defeat Killmonger physically, he allows Killmonger's challenge to change him. And isn't that often how growth works? The people who frustrate us the most sometimes reveal the truths we've worked the hardest to avoid. Now, to be very clear, understanding someone's pain does not excuse harmful choices. Killmonger causes tremendous destruction, but understanding where anger comes from, that creates compassion. Compassion without accountability becomes enabling. Accountability without compassion becomes cruelty. Wisdom requires both. What criticism do you immediately dismiss? Is there a possibility that underneath the delivery, there's something worth examining? Throughout Black Panther, everyone has an opinion about who T'Challa should be. Continue tradition, protect Wakanda, open Wakanda, fight, forgive, lead differently, lead the same. And if you've ever tried to become a fuller version of yourself, you know exactly how exhausting that is. Because growth often disappoints people. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because people become attached to the earlier versions of you. The version that never said no, the version that always kept the peace, the version that fulfilled expectations without questions. But becoming yourself sometimes means grieving identities that no longer fit. And T'Challa chooses something remarkable. He honors where he came from without being imprisoned by it. And maybe that's an invitation for all of us to ask ourselves, who am I beneath everyone's expectations, and who do I want to become? One of my favorite moments in Black Panther happens near the end of the film. T'Challa returns to the ancestral plane and confronts his father. Only this time, he doesn't kneel in unquestioning agreement. He says, "You were wrong." And if you grew up in a family or culture where questioning authority felt somewhere between mildly disrespectful and an express ticket to being grounded forever, this scene hits differently. Because T'Challa isn't rejecting his father here, he's differentiating from him. He's becoming his own person. Psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan developed something called the self determination theory, which suggests that human beings thrive when three psychological needs are met: autonomy, the feeling that we have a choice in our own agency; competence, the belief that we can effectively navigate challenges; and relatedness, feeling connected to others. Here's the problem: a lot of us sacrifice autonomy in order to maintain relatedness. We become who everyone expects us to be because we don't want to disappoint people. We pursue careers because they're practical. We stay quiet because we are the easy one. We keep traditions because that's just the way it's always been done. And eventually we realize that we have built a life that's externally successful, but internally disconnected. T'Challa chooses another path. He maintains his connection to Wakanda. He honors his family, but he also exercises autonomy. He decides what kind of king he wants to be. Because healthy adulthood isn't choosing between belonging and individuality, it's learning how to hold both of those things. Where in your life are you operating from an obligation rather than a choice? And if fear of disappointing others disappeared for a moment, what decision might you make differently? At the beginning of Black Panther, Wakanda's philosophy is simple: protect ourselves, stay hidden, don't interfere. It's worked for generations. And that's what makes changing it so hard. Because success often convinces us that our current way of doing things is morally correct. But psychologists call this status quo bias. We tend to prefer familiar systems even when they no longer align with our values. Because changing means risk, changing means criticism, changing means uncertainty. And T'Challa experiences all of it. When he decides to open Wakanda to the world, he's not choosing the safest option. He's choosing the option that aligns with who he's becoming. Leadership researcher Ronald Heifs refers to this as adaptive leadership. Technical problems have existing solutions. Adaptive challenges require transformation. You can't solve them with old answers. You have to become someone new. T'Challa realizes Wakanda's challenge isn't simply defending its borders, it's redefining identity. And maybe some of us are facing adaptive challenges too. You can't use old coping strategies for new seasons of your life. People pleasing won't build healthy boundaries. Perfectionism won't teach self compassion. Avoidance won't heal your grief. The old version of you got this far, but perhaps it can't take you where you're meant to go next. What problem in your life are you trying to solve with an outdated version of yourself? And what would it look like to respond differently? I want to acknowledge something important here. It's probably the most important moment in the entire movie. T'Challa loses. Like, he literally gets thrown off a waterfall. Imagine becoming king and immediately having the worst performance review imaginable. Like, you know what? I think we're going to go with another candidate. Not ideal. But psychologically, failure is one of the greatest teachers of resilience. Psychologist Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset reminds us that people who view setbacks as opportunities for learning rather than evidence of inadequacy tend to persevere longer and adapt more effectively. Failure doesn't always mean I am incapable. Sometimes it means I'm learning. T'Challa's defeat strips away certainty. It strips away title. It strips away power. And yet, his character remains. And he still chooses compassion. He still chooses courage. He still chooses service. But identity built solely on achievement crumbles the moment success disappears. But identity grounded in values, that survives loss. If you lost the titles you rely on to define yourself, who would you be? And what values would remain for that person? The final conversation between T'Challa and Killmonger is heartbreaking. Killmonger chooses death over imprisonment. And while his choice remains tragic, T'Challa still walks away from that encounter transformed. He has seen what isolation costs. He now understands that protecting only your own eventually shrinks your humanity. And so he says one of the most beautiful lines in the entire Marvel universe. In times of crises, the wise build bridges while the foolish build barriers. Now, what strikes me is bridge building isn't easy. Bridges require vulnerability, listening, compromise, curiosity, empathy. It's much easier to retreat into camps of us versus them. Psychologist Gordon Allport's contact hypothesis proposed that meaningful interaction between groups can reduce prejudice and increase understanding. Connection changes people, isolation hardens them. T'Challa's final decision isn't weakness, it's wisdom. He chooses relationship over fear, possibility over certainty, hope over self protection. And perhaps that is leadership at its finest. Not domination, not perfection, but creating a future that is bigger than your own fear. Maybe you're carrying expectations that don't fit anymore. Maybe you're trying to honor people that you love while becoming someone they don't fully understand yet. Maybe you're grieving versions of yourself that you have outgrown. Maybe you've spent years trying to earn your worth through responsibility. If any of these sound like you, I want you to remember this. T'Challa didn't become the leader Wakanda needed by perfectly imitating those who came before him. He became leader by listening, questioning, learning, admitting mistakes, choosing compassion, and having the courage to evolve. You are allowed to outgrow inherited expectations. You are allowed to examine the stories you've been given. You are allowed to become someone that your younger self couldn't yet imagine. Legacy isn't about preserving the past exactly as it was. It's about taking what is good, healing what is broken, and passing something wiser forward. Before the weekend is over, take a few minutes to reflect on these questions. What expectations from others have shaped the person I have become? What expectations still align with my values, and which ones no longer fit? What kind of leader am I becoming in my own life? And what bridge have I avoided building? Be honest. Write down your answers. No one else has to read them because awareness is often the first step toward transformation. And if you're looking for a place to explore questions like these more deeply, don't forget about the Grounded Mage's Hero's Journey Journal. It is designed to help you navigate your own adventure through reflection prompts inspired by the hero's journey. There is a freebie preview in the description down below, and if you like that, I have also put the links for purchase in the description as well. Because every hero eventually faces the same challenge: figuring out who they are beneath the expectations, fears, and roles they've inherited. You don't need a vibranium suit. You just need the willingness to be curious about your own story. We have talked about kings, queens, princesses, gods, and goddesses on this channel. But next week, we are talking about refugees, duty, destiny, and one of mythology's most overlooked heroes, the Trojan warrior who carried his father on his shoulders while his world burned around him. A man caught between grief and responsibility. A man who teaches us what it means to move forward when your heart is looking backwards. Next week, we dive into the psychology of Aeneas. And trust me, if you have ever struggled with letting go of the life you planned in order to embrace the life that's asking you to emerge, you are not going to want to miss that one. Until next week, fellow mages, make it make magic.